Well, good morning, listeners. It's morning as I'm recording this episode, and it's nighttime for Phillip Jarrell. Our time zones are like 13 hours apart. Um, and it's crazy because he was just saying he's about to be in my tomorrow. He's already finished my today, which is kind of crazy. Um, but Phillip Jarrell is actually a very well-known singer, songwriter, musician. A very famous song that I think even some of my younger listeners will recognize is Torn Between Two Lovers. He co-wrote that song. And then he has since then written several songs, worked with several prominent musicians, which we'll talk about, and is just recently starting to get back into the songwriting scene and has written some of his own songs. Um, and so I want to talk to him about those as well as just his life as a songwriter and differences he's seen in the music industry since then. So, Philip, I'm so grateful. Thank you, first of all, for staying up so late on your end, and I'm so grateful that we can chat.
Nice to meet you. Happy to say hello.
So, Philip, first of all, I wanted to ask you songwriting and music, at least from the people I've met, you've got people who listen to music and love music, and then you've got the people who really love music and dedicate their lives to it and writing music, and um, it's just their passion. So it's more than listening, it's writing, it's creating these tunes and wanting to use music to impact the world in a positive way. What kind of got you started in it? Like why did you want to start songwriting and music? Was there something you were passionate about since you were a kid, or was it something that came later on in life?
Yeah, it was always my focus. It was always something that was there. And I can remember at least somewhere between 3 and 6 years old, you know, listening to the songs on the radio and singing. I knew all the words. And my dad played guitar. My dad was in the military, was a soldier, but he played guitar, and we lived in Germany in the 50s when Elvis came to Germany.
Mm-hmm.
So there was lots of talk. My dad liked Elvis and Johnny Cash, and there was a radio. We could listen to radio there. There was no TV, so all there was radio, and mostly they played music, and I would listen every night. So I knew all the words to Buddy Holly and whatever was going on then. But I just remember it was mostly Elvis, Johnny Cash, and Buddy Holly. Those are the main ones. And that was and my dad played guitar, and so I just watched him and wanted to do that. So it just it during school, getting into 10, 11 years old. I started playing when I was 10. I got my first guitar. And before that, I told all my friends I could play the guitar. I used to talk about it all the time. And I don't know why I did that, but I told them, yeah, I play the guitar. And I did it. I guess I assumed I was like my father. I don't know, but it took me until I was 10 or 11 before I got one. And then it's all I could think of. Once I got it, I just sat in my room all the time. I closed the door and played. And then I got an electric guitar, and then I had to really lock myself in and close the door. And then the Beatles came and changed everything, the style, and it's all I ever wanted to do. I knew when I was in school, there was no chance I was going to do anything in school. All I could about was music all day long. I had a band by the time I was 13, and actually started playing gigs. And we lived on military base, so I could play at the NCO club, the officers club. I had a little band, and we got some gigs. And we had played the school dance. I was 13. I can remember that clearly. So
What
it
was the
was
name of
funny,
your band?
I'm not sure what the first one that one was, but by the time I was about 15. I remember that band was a three-piece band, and we were called the Cellophane Society. And that, it had to do with the Plastic Ono band, I'm sure. you know, and we played Hendrix and Cream and this kind of 60s psychedelic music, just bass, guitar, and drums. And and then I had it. The next band was called the Metal Circus, which was by the time I was 16. We had a four-piece band, and then we got a female vocalist in, and we started playing Friday, Saturdays, and Sunday nights, and playing gigs and making money. But there was no chance I was going to college, or my brain was only. I like sports, and I played football and ran track. But at some point, I had to decide if I wanted to increase my size and play football, or if I was just going to be a guitar player. And I got to a certain point. I broke my foot, and I thought, okay, wait, maybe I need to be a guitar player. And yeah, that was like the summer that changed everything. I remember that. It just completely went my music way, and I'm still on that path. Though I did many things along the way. The music thing. We played. We had bands, and then I had a duo, and we did. We you just follow the. I think I just followed the breadcrumbs, and I'm still doing that. I'm still finding my way. But that it's I just told somebody that story this morning. I ended up, after many years of playing 6 nights a week, going on this. We were. I ended up with a duo with me and a female vocalist, and we were on tour for 5 years, playing 6 nights a week, all
Wow.
along the southeast coastline, from Virginia down to New Orleans, and we just played the hotels and lounges, the Hyatt houses, whatever, and it was 6 nights a week. So we would go back. My dad retired in Fort Benning, Georgia, so we would go back and so that was the home base. Except we only got back there maybe 2 weeks, and then go back out again and come back for 2 weeks at some point. So in one year, we would be there for a month. And
Wow.
when we started doing gigs there, in this little town called Columbus, Georgia, and so we stayed there more often, but we were still 6 nights a week. And on Sunday night, we would just go out somewhere, and listen to music. So yeah, it's really that was just like a club gig lounge kind of situation. But during that whole time, I started writing songs. Actually, I started writing songs again when I was in junior high school, very early. And that was just always something that I did. I started recording and writing whatever what you can do in your bedroom, when I was 15, 14. And it wasn't until my early 20s that I started getting into a real recording studio and starting to step into that world. And we were just, we were just playing whatever we could get. At times we would. I remember we were on Fort Benning, and my female vocalist partner, her father was a colonel. My dad was a major by that time, so we were often playing on Fort Benning, and I think we were about 18 years old by that time, and we were playing at this religious coffee house in the back of a chapel,
Hmm.
which is a church, right? And the guy who was the minister was a friend of ours, and it was like a black light coffee house. there were posters on the wall. It was a psychedelic place, and they had popcorn. In the front was a church, and in the back was a little room, which was a religious coffee house. And it was really, it was during the Vietnam War, and it was especially for soldiers who had gotten into drugs, and they wanted to lure them into the church and
Hmm.
give them a place to come and hang out. And so we would play, just acoustic guitar and kind of folk music and go in there. And usually it was just a couple of guys, and they were all really young guys who had been drafted and were either going or just had come back from the Vietnam War. And that's who we played to. This was getting close to the end of the 60s. And one day there was a woman in there. It was very unusual, and she was talking to the chaplain in the back, and we took a break and went back there, and we spoke, and she said, I like your songs, and my brother is a music producer. He makes hit records, and you should get in touch with him. And people said that every night. You play in the club and people go, "Oh, I can make you a star." And they would come up and give you a phone number or something, especially to the female vocalist. And so that was something we heard all the time. And it was like, okay, sure. Okay, yeah. I mean, just nice. And she was nice. And I wrote down her brother's name and phone number on a piece of paper, put it in my wallet. And I didn't really think of it again. And it just stayed in my wallet. And we played for years on this tour. And we kind of got to the plateau. We were making about as much money as you could make in that level of clubs.
Right.
And we were getting really tired of it. And I thought, okay, what are we going to do next? And I really didn't know what to do. And I don't know, I came across that phone number in my wallet, and I took it out. It was at least 2 years had passed by, maybe more. And I don't even have any idea why I kept that piece of paper, whatever. But I, there weren't cell phones. You go to a landline, you make a long distance call. It was a big deal. And, we were playing in hotels. I remember we were playing at the Ramada Inn in Gulfport, Mississippi, on the beach for 3 months, 6 nights a week. And I called this guy. His name is Barry Beckett, and he's in Muscle Shoals. And I have no idea really who he is. It's so weird. I mean, I really didn't even know what he did. And I called him and I said, "You're going to think I'm a crazy." He answered the phone. I said, "Phillip Jarrell here, and you're going to think I'm like a crazy person, but I swear I met your sister in a religious coffee house, and she said she likes my songs and that her brother makes hit records, and I should give him a call. And here I am." I said, "It was a couple of years ago, but how are you, man?" and the guy, he said, "Well, listen, if my sister said so," he said, "My sister, she's got great taste, and she sent me some other thing, and it turned out to be something really great. So if my sister told you so, you should come over here and let me hear your songs."
Wow.
That guy was in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, and so we made an appointment, fly to Muscle Shoals and bring the songs. We didn't, there was no internet. It was a big deal. And I talked to the guy who was the manager of the Ramada Inn. And it was this old guy. He said, "I love that story, and I'd love to go to meet this guy." He said, I used to be a pilot in the military, and I have my own little airplane, and I never get to fly it. So on the weekend, like we're off on Sunday, why don't we fly off to Muscle Shoals and meet this guy? That would be fun." And I said, "Yeah, sure." So this whole thing just came together like that. And
Wow.
Barry came to pick us up at the airport, and we went to his home, down to his basement, where he had this great room with a pool table and this whole listening room with speakers and gold records everywhere. Okay. It was a large room, and then was a smaller listening room, but in the pool room for playing pool, gold records on every wall. And I had never seen a gold record. I absolutely didn't know what I had walked into. We went into his back room where he had the speaker set up, and we listened and we talked for hours and hours. He listened to absolutely every song that I brought. And he said, I think you're a really good songwriter, and I think you're ready to write a hit song. He said, I don't think you've got a hit song here. And he liked the singer that I was working with. Her name was Sherry. So he said, I would like to record Sherry. So you bring me 5 songs, and I will cut Sherry as the artist, and you write the songs. I said, sure, okay. We went back to play our gig, and then we were in Columbus, Georgia, playing. He actually drove with a friend of his in his car. Just wanted to go for a drive one day. It's long. It's like 4 or 5 hours. It's not around the corner for him. He drove over on a Saturday night and watched our gig as we played live, just the duo, and then we hung out, and he handed me the contracts. He says, here's the deal, sign it and let's go. Let's make a record. And I didn't even know a lawyer. I knew nothing. I called the guy, and nobody knew anything about the music business. I took it to a lawyer, and he says, it's a contract. He says, it's a real contract. It's binding. Maybe this guy can help you. Just sign it and see what happens. How do you like that for legal advice? so so that's what happened. We signed it. We went there. We recorded 3 songs. I wrote the 5 songs. We went there. We recorded the 3 songs, and right away he got a record deal with Private Stock Records. Just a single. You put out a single, and see, if something good happens, you make an album, right? And it was picked to hit in Billboard magazine, and I went there to make demos of my songs before we did it, before we decided which song was going to happen. And I was there with the Muscle Shoals rhythm section, which was Barry Beckett, Roger Hawkins, Jimmy Johnson, and David Hood, who are now like some of the most famous guys in the world. Everybody now knows who the Muscle Shoals rhythm section is. But at that time, I also didn't know, right? I'm in there, but I got there into the studio, and that's the first time I'd ever been in a real session. And I was sitting there playing my songs, and they would learn them immediately. And, they were producing my songs. I was so scared I could hear my heart beating in my headphones, and I couldn't hardly breathe. And I'm trying to play the songs, and they were so down to earth and so cool, and they just told me how to do it, whatever. And they were all 4 in there. And that was my introduction to Muscle Shoals. And then we did the 3 songs with Sherry. And, that was a big leap from starting to play in clubs to, at age 13 to by that time, probably being 23 years old by that time, like many years of being in the clubs, being just exhausted from, the life.
Yeah.
And then being there. So it was like, okay, I finally made it. And and the song that she did came out. It was picked to hit in Billboard. And a strange thing happened right at that, exactly within the weeks. They found a song that they thought was going to be a big hit. And this song that they signed with Private Stock Records, is a kind of an independent record company, was a song called My Eyes Adored You by Frankie Valli. And later I found out Frankie Valli was with Motown, and Motown wouldn't put this thing out. So he was very discouraged and didn't know what to do. And Private Stock heard that song, and they thought, this is a great song. And they put all their energy behind Frankie Valli's song. and our song just kind of fell off. They just didn't do anything else. So a
Mm.
few weeks went by, and they said, okay, well, let's go record some on the next one. And Sherry, the singer, she said, I think we should get somebody else's songs. So, so okay, And I called Barry and I said, Barry, would you, what are we going to do? Sherry wants somebody else's songs. So why don't we, see what do you think? So he said, let's go to Nashville and find her some more songs. So he and I went there and we met this guy at Screen Gems Publishing, and he got us some songs by some people who had written many hit songs and brought them back, and they planned a session. Meanwhile, P, Barry Barry was recording, had already recorded Peter Yarrow, Peter, Paul, and Mary, had done his solo album, was co-producing with Peter. And he said, look, you're not doing this thing with Sherry, so why don't you write something for Peter? And he told Peter about me, and Peter listened to some songs, and he said, I think these are really great songs, but they're not my style, so we need to write something together. And so Barry arranged for me to fly out to Peter's home in Malibu uh, to spend 2 weeks working with Peter writing songs for his album. And so I landed in Los Angeles. This was all just lined up. Here I am. Peter, Paul, and Mary was for me very important. I grew up listening to Leaving on a Jet Plane and Puff the Magic Dragon and all of these things. I was in the back seat of my parents' car, and the radio was, and Leaving on a Jet Plane was going on, so they were my heroes. And all of a sudden there I was like going to Malibu to write songs with Peter Yarrow was a big deal. And he picked me up at the airport. We went to his house. He lived on Malibu Beach, which is now not there anymore. That's the one that I'm sure his house is gone from the fires.
Yeah.
And I guess you know that Peter recently passed away just a few weeks ago. So that's anyway. At that point, I was staying with Peter, and he was like a professional, and he set it up. We write for 4 hours in the morning. We have lunch. We go jogging on the beach. We come back. We work for 4 hours, and then we're off
Hmm.
for the whatever you want. It was very professional. And so every after we would have lunch, and we would go jogging, and his neighbor was Steve McQueen and Ally McGraw. And Ally McGraw would be laying in her bikini outside, and we would run over, and Peter would say, what do you think about this one? And he would tell her the lyrics, and she read the lyrics, whatever we had, Torn Between Two Lovers, and she would say, I like it. Finish this one. It's really good. And we were working on like 5 songs. And then one day, Jimmy Johnson from Muscle Shoals was the publisher. Came from all the way from Muscle Shoals, flew out to California, and came by to say, how are you guys doing? Well, let's hear what you got. And we played him whatever we had, and he heard Torn Between Two Lovers, which was half finished. He said, that one. I like it. Finish this one. I think you got something there. And so people were away. For me, I didn't, they were pretty much all equal to me. I couldn't say, wow, this is a really good one, but I thought it was politically, it was great. I thought it, and the thing was, by the time, it was bizarre because we were supposed to be writing for Peter's album, his
Right.
next
Yeah.
album. But right in the middle of us working together, one day Peter was like really missing for an hour when we were supposed to be writing. He came back, he was so depressed And he had just been with his lawyer on the phone and just found out that Warner Brothers had canceled his next album. And so he was really distraught about it. And I thought, well, just my luck. I'm sitting here with Peter, and Peter now it doesn't have a record deal either. Just, you know, and but right away he said that he had a background singer. He had been on tour and he had a background singer, and her name was Mary McGregor. And this was not the Mary of Peter, Paul, and Mary. It was a young girl who had just been the background singer, and
Hmm.
she lived in Colorado. And he had told her he wanted to produce something on her. And he said, I'm going to go do that. Now I have time to do it. And he just right away got that idea. And we finished the songs. And so he was saying, this one now, I think this one, it's for Mary. And so all of it, we flipped it now. Oh, this is for a girl. It became more important, and it became more focused about really what was how important it was.
I
Way
was
more
gonna,
important.
yeah, I was
Yeah.
gonna ask you when you said politically about the song Torn Between Two Lovers. I I've never thought of it as political. Was it when you originally wrote it, was it supposed to mean something else than it does now?
Well, political was that there was a women's movement happening, and that was politics. And the women's movement was a woman's power. There were a couple of songs like
Okay.
I am woman, hear me roar" by
Right.
Helen Reddy. And women were becoming more powerful in the workplace. And so women were like taking their power, in a new way. They were getting jobs, they were getting higher jobs, they were less dependent on being married. and and there was a real situation between, in relationships where the woman was, before then, woman's role was to be at home raising
Right.
children, and the man would go to had the job and made the money. And so that was the dynamic. And right in the middle of the 70s, that's when that started changing. That
Okay.
women started getting jobs and getting paid even higher wages than her husband. And maybe at some point in the 80s, actually a lot of those men started getting fired because they were higher paid. And
Hmm.
then the whole balance between men and women in the workplace changed. And
So
that,
Torn Between Two Lovers kind of is giving the woman that main role of choosing the guy, I guess, in a way, right?
well, the other dynamic was because of this relationship of the man being the one who made the money. All right. There was, when I say politics, there's politics between people in their relationship.
Oh,
And
I see.
it's a relationship dynamics. Whereas the person, if one person is generating the income and the other person is not generating any income, they're really dependent on that other person, which gives that
Right.
other person a lot of power. And people are not generally very nice under these circumstances. One feels like, well, look, I'm taking care of you, I can do what I want because I'm the one who's bringing in the money or whatever. And so it wasn't so unusual for a man to have an outside relationship and then come home and say, I'm sorry, it doesn't mean anything, don't worry about it. And the woman would be distraught over being abandoned and whatever those things. It was a terrible situation in a
Oh.
way.
So you switched the roles then?
Well, this gave it, just, it was a very simple thing that, there were lots of books written about it, psychology books, and there was a movie made about it. And it was a real thing in the social landscape because of that changing role. And so there was a whole kind of backlash about guys who just hated it because their wife came home and told them they had another lover, all of a sudden it became like, yeah, that's right. Why I shouldn't come home? And before that, like a woman just they just thought they wouldn't dare to tell if they did have a an outside relationship. But a man would come home and he would admit it and he would say sorry, but that's what you got. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
But a woman would just not. It was a secret, and if she were to get caught, that was a big deal because a man could not accept that, but he expected his woman to accept that. So
So
it
was
was a real.
this, do you think your song prompted more of this to happen, or you were kind of reflecting what was happening in the culture at the time, that there was this switch?
It was just a reflection of what was happening. I for sure I didn't make anything happen. What it did was all of a sudden women said, yeah, I can I can talk about it.
I
And
see.
as it turned out, there were many women who had extra lovers, but they never talked about it. So all of a sudden, they were free in a way to talk about a little bit more what was going on, and all of a so it seemed like something new happened. All of a sudden, women were free, but in a way, they were free, a little bit more free to talk about it.
Okay.
And the way and I had guys come to me and go, look, I have a right to have a woman who's not having an extra lover or whatever. I have a right. I have a right. And they would be, people go, I'm going to kill this guy if I ever meet the guy who wrote this song. I mean, they were really mad. And, and I think there are things, and there were psychology books written about the man has a right. He should demand that his woman is monogamous and you know, and there were 2 points about the song that made it so special. One was, and the most important thing was that it was about the honesty. It if it gave the woman any right, it was the right to be honest.
I see.
And
Yeah,
the
that's true.
and when in the song when she came to her man and told the story, she did it in a very peaceful way. It was very kind and loving. It's the sweet voice that she has, and I think that really made the magic. And it just happened that way. That's just Mary's voice. But she was just the perfect one in such a sweet and gentle way. She told a truth about herself and said, and she didn't come in like, oh God, I'm so sorry. She just said, this is something I needed to do. And I wish you wouldn't hate me for it. And this is what we got. But it was generally the case that people did not tell the truth. And I don't know today how it goes, that people are honest about their relationships.
Mm.
I'm sure that relationships, a lot of them are a lot looser and more things are acceptable. But human beings are the way they are. It's a very complicated and emotional theater, this relationship thing. And I've certainly uh, gone through the learning process of many relationships, and with a myself, an honest, you know, searching for what's the way. I basically always wanted things to work and always wanted it to work out, but not accepting it must be a certain way, trying to sort out what really is going on here
Yeah.
rather than fitting in a box that society made, especially in those days.
Have you come to a conclusion on what's the most ideal relationship setup?
Well, I that's kind of why I sent you the new material this morning, which I don't think you had a chance to look at because I don't think there's any ideal thing, and I don't think there's any fixed thing. But um, the new song, which should come out this year, and it's not new that I wrote it. I wrote it actually in the '90s. But what the whole progression of love songs and relationships led to, and I'm still working on it, is a song is called "Learning to Talk,"
Hmm.
and so there was uh, a process of of psychology, and emotional going through my own stuff
Yeah.
and trying to sort out myself. I mean, for sure, the starting point is with ourselves, to know yourself
Right.
and figure out how to get honest. You can't even get with yourself until you figure out what you need and how to deal with it and where's all that stuff coming from. And plus, when you're young, you just don't know, right? You have all these interests, and this is exciting, and you don't know which thing to follow, and it's also interesting and it's cool, and you want, and then you have all these hormones going on. It's like I got to do something, right? And it's crazy, and all these years, I think back, I wonder, about so many elements of the whole thing, but still just within the relationship between two people, I think it's the learning to talk
Yeah, to
that
be communication open.
it's about talking, and it's about being honest, and it's about learning how to talk.
Yeah.
That's really not easy. And to this day, I still don't have the answer. I mean, I that's the process, and I'm sure that's where it's all at. You know,
And
it's
when you
all,
mean the answer, you mean the answer to how to have a good relationship kind of thing?
yeah. I mean, there isn't a fixed way when you say what's the best or did you ever figure it out? And my answer to that is no, I didn't figure it out. The only thing I can say is learning to talk is the process to be engaged.
Yeah.
It's not about your hair, how you look. The relationship, it's so complicated. It has to do with what you're attracted to, what you like, what's your career, how you want your life to be, the
Yeah.
things you want, the car, the house, the job, the clothes, the look, you know, it's your college, your degrees, your muscles, your this, your that. It's everything in life, and it all meshed together in a relationship between two people, and that somehow has to coordinate a thing that works or
Yeah.
doesn't work, you know.
Yeah.
And when they don't work, the thing for me, my life has just really been centered around relationships. And if you follow any of the things in my bio, I did the music business thing, and at some point I walked away from that and I followed my photography career. It's all been artistic, but I traveled on this fashion trail for the next many years, and which eventually, I went to Milano, to Paris, to Germany, and back to New York, and just it was a fashion trail that went on for 20 years until it brought me to Shanghai in 2002. And after I was in China, that's when somebody came to me with the idea of making guitars, and I got into that and I did the research, and it it took me back to the music because I
Yeah.
didn't even bring a guitar with me when I came to China. I brought cameras and was doing fashion photography. I was writing songs and doing all of that on that trail. I had computer and MIDI system and everything in Paris, and I started producing my own music and doing all of that, learning how to do that on my own since I was just out in the world. But it wasn't until the middle of started making guitars and getting back into the guitar world, that I thought, well, who do I know and how can I reconnect? And I would call people, and I ended up connecting with people like Mac McAnally. I don't know if you have ever heard of him, but he was in the Jimmy Buffett band for 20 years, I guess. And Mac played on my Motown album in 1977. He was a session guy in Muscle Shoals, and he was just getting started, and I had already had a number one song. So I was like the big guy with a record deal who hired Mac to come in and play, and he was really a kid. And then there it was all those years later that I we reconnected through a mutual friend, and
Hmm.
he said, "Wow, I want to see your guitars." And he started playing one of my guitars on stage with the Jimmy Buffett tour. And then the other guy, Peter Mayer, who also in the Jimmy Buffett band, he said, I want one too, right? And so all of a sudden I had guitars out on the major tour circuit and starting to get reviewed in guitar magazines and things like that. So
Hmm.
it all just basically brought me back to the music friends, and you know that it didn't get me back to music. I just hung out and played with these guys, and we reconnected. But it wasn't until COVID that I was in lockdown, and yeah, I had I was really in lockdown in Shanghai, and that was a scary thing. And all I had in my apartment, I had a box of tapes, and I had to figure out, okay, what am I going to do here? Because I didn't know, I didn't know what was going to happen. Nobody knew. And I was
Yeah.
one of the few Western people who was still there because everybody had gone home for the Chinese New Year. Everybody leaves. Everybody in Shanghai goes to their hometown. The Chinese people go, and Western people, they would fly away for a couple of weeks vacation. But I just stayed there, and that was always a time when I have a very quiet time in Shanghai. And
Yeah.
and that the lockdown happened, and all of a sudden I was there by myself, and nobody could come back. They canceled everybody's visas, and all my friends were locked out. They were wherever they were and couldn't get back into China. And yeah, so I that's when I started thinking, okay, I've got some songs that I never released, and it totally threw me into another world of the whole photography thing, and everything that was happening in the outside world was canceled and ended up being basically canceled for the next 2 years. And basically it's just starting to go again, but the whole world changed, and there I was with my music again. And I started writing, so I started producing, sitting there. I had the Garage Band or Logic Pro in my computer, started recording and writing new songs, and boom, there I was with it. There's been a whole process of getting back to it.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean that's crazy that when I think about it that you start out bands and then you do photography and then you do fashion and then you do guitars. I mean that's quite a journey of life. That's quite a eclectic. I mean, yes, it's all artistic, but I mean you've been able to go into so many different things. I think that's fascinating. I also I have to say I admire the fact that you're so flexible with the change because I know speaking to so many musicians, it's really hard when life changes or like COVID comes or something, and then they can't do what they were doing before, and so adapting is hard to try to find something else to do. And I think it's really cool that, I mean, you just kind of went with the flow, which I think is a unique. I haven't heard of a lot of musicians who are able to do that without it being a very like very emotionally, like a crisis mode for them if they have to change. And I think that's really cool that for you it was just, you kind of just went with the flow of what worked at the time.
Well, it sounds like that. I, I'm sure it was as difficult as it is for anybody. And I think, the thing about the photography was that it wasn't just my father was also a photographer. So I always had a camera in my hands, like I always had a guitar in my hands. And so and I studied, I took classes on the military base, and I carried the camera with me on the road while I was playing music. So I have actually photo books, all the clubs we played, and all the, we used to stop at the sign that said, "You're now entering Tennessee." We get out and stand there and snap a picture. So I have that stuff, and that was always a part, but that was always just my fun,
Yeah.
and I think the big transition, you know, there's a big story about the music business, uh, where as I eventually, obviously torn between two lovers, became number one, and I a big story in there that actually went from Peter Yarrow, who called his old manager Albert Grossman, who lived in Woodstock, New York, and said, "Albert, you need to meet Philip." And Albert managed Peter, Paul and Mary, Bob Dylan, Janis Joplin, uh, I think at one time even Jimi Hendrix. And he had a record company called Bearsville Records, and like the Beatles would come there, right? It was just like he was an amazing guy, and I went and met him, and so, and I ended up moving to Woodstock and had a house there for 5 or 6 years. But at some point, I signed with Motown, right? So anyway, there's a big music story, which is a whole thing. We don't really have that much time, I'm sure, but the change came when the whole music thing, which went on really about 4 or 5 years, the big time music thing, and America actually had a kind of recession in like 1981 and 1982.
Yeah.
And this affected the music business. And lots of people got fired, and I mean, at CBS Records, which was the biggest record company in America, on one day they fired 300 employees from CBS Records. And a lot of
Wow.
record companies went out of business, but they all just shrank. And the whole idea changed.
Hmm.
Ronald Reagan became the president. I can remember certain points along the way. And that was a point where Reagan became president, and the whole attitude in America changed. There was a recession. So, you know, it was very difficult to get a record deal at that time. And after having been quite high in the music business, I wasn't ready to start again. So it was like, okay, if you want to keep going, you need to, okay, get busy writing new songs and go through the whole process again. And
Hmm.
I didn't have the heart for it, really. I did make a last album, which we never made a deal, and it never came out. And at that moment, actually, I met a model. I met this gorgeous model in New York while I was working on the album, and she needed photos, and she was just getting started, wanted to be a fashion model, and I helped her make her photos. And her
Hmm.
agency loved the photos. And the next day the phone started ringing with, can you shoot my models, and I had never shot fashion before, so I had to get assist a fashion photographer and learn how to do that, and it started to take off right away. But the process that got me there was actually that I had gotten somehow I had really bottomed from the music business. I had all those years been playing in clubs every night, and it all had to do with playing in clubs and drinking and being in smoky bar rooms and the whole lifestyle. I really just bottomed out on it, and I got sober, and and it there was a real kind of uh, symbolic thing about becoming a photographer, which you have to get up in the morning with the sunshine and get out and shoot in the
Mm.
daytime, which was a total opposite of being like a Dracula, a vampire where you're up at night and your life doesn't start until midnight, and you're up all night, and and you come home when the sun goes down. And all of a sudden, I flipped my life around. So in there was this huge spiritual awakening kind of. I was always on a spiritual path, meaning that I studied everything spiritual. Um, with the Beatles, if I took drugs, that it was a spiritual journey. It was like you go and study with a Maharishi, you go learn to do yoga in India or whatever. There was always a spiritual element to me. And somewhere at that point, there was this huge spiritual personal awakening, where I realized that all those years I played music, I didn't read books. I didn't really do anything else except live in my music world.
Mm.
And I had lots of friends who had died, and some of them killed themselves along, some the keyboard player in Muscle Shoals. We were going I was booking him on, we need to start a new session, and he had committed suicide. And then I got a call, oh, it's a terrible story. And then other people that were really at a very high level in the music business, really great, amazing musicians. And they
Mm.
did ridiculous things and basically had killed themselves,
Yeah.
you know, and 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 what I realized, I actually read a book called Choosing and Changing, and it said you could change. You didn't, if you didn't like the person that you were, you could change. And I think that was probably something that really saved me. But what I figured out was that there there's people that, we create this persona that becomes us. And I mean, people said, well, you can't change. You're a musician. You're never going to change. And my friends told me that. And I realized that we create these characters. We create a persona that's us, and that we live that. And if we need to change, sometimes it seems the choice is that that person needs to die. It's a person, you kind of go on a journey that comes to the end of a trail, and you don't know what to do anymore. And all of a sudden you're thinking, I'm at the end of the story.
Yeah.
And and so I was watching my friends die, and some of them were so full of life, and they really chose to die. And I just thought, that is ridiculous. And I mean, I remember, confronting myself and having these internal dialogues about, well, if it gets too bad, you'll just kill yourself. I had these kinds of things, and I
Yeah.
had to go through the process, and
Yeah.
I read every spiritual book I could get my hands on for years. At that juncture, it had to do with getting sober, stop living that life, and read everything I could get my hands on.
Yeah.
Uh, so I had, 1,000 books in my apartment. I always thought I'd have a library that I would keep forever, but that didn't last either. But that's what I did. I read everything I could get my hands on, and I learned how to meditate, how to breathe, how to do yoga things, all the different genres of spirituality. I studied them all I could. And so I started writing those kinds of songs. And I thought, okay, this is where I want to go. But then they said, oh, that's new age stuff. And then you got into the 80s, it was like new age, that's nothing. And metal rock happened, and Madonna happened, and Michael Jackson happened. And I just thought, well, people aren't interested in this kinds of messages and this kinds of music so much. So I wrote them, and I spent 10 years of studying and writing that kind of song,
Yeah.
thinking that people would come to that. So those are actually, I put three of those songs out and they're on my website.
Hmm.
And those are very, kind of mystical spiritual messages, which, I think I need to sort of update some reviews on them. People don't really listen, but for me, the lyrics are really full of a message. There's a
Hmm.
lot in the words that are written in the songs, uh, and even more so now.
Well,
Yeah.
Philip, I mean, I wish we could keep going because right now you're starting to get even, I have so many more questions, but unfortunately I have to go. But I wanted to say, first of all, for listeners, I will put a link to Philip's website, which I highly recommend you look at. He has a very detailed bio, talks about the awards he's won, it talks about his journey with music. It shows lyrics to his music and gives you access to his Spotify channel where a lot of his music is. And Philip, I have to say, it's been fascinating to talk with you because it's so cool to see how history and music interact and how you're talking about like the different times and how that affected what type of music people were listening to. And I think that's just fascinating. And I mean, I've just started to get into learning more about like the time of Bob Dylan and learning more about the different movements that have been going on. And when you were talking about um, Torn Between Two Lovers, I find that fascinating. I didn't know at all that that was a cultural shift that you were seeing and you were actually putting that into music, which I think is incredible to know. Um, so again, listeners, I'm going to put all this information on there. I highly recommend you learn more about Philip's life. Obviously, it's very extensive and listen to the spiritual songs he has on there as well. And Philip, I just, again, thank you so much for doing this and for staying up so late. I've never had an interviewer willing to stay up past 11 p.m. for an interview, so I'm very grateful.
Well, it's not that late for me. I again, I circle back to the music, and I've been in the studio for the last year. Here, I'm in China, but I sometimes open the door and the sun's coming up. So yeah, I'm kind of I'm more on U.S. time now than I am on China time. So yeah, I'll be up for many hours here. I'll just get back to work. So it's
Okay.
been really great. Yeah, I'm really, really my honor to meet you too. I think it's amazing to sort of, I'm kind of a hermit, I go my own way for a long time and I don't reconnect with what's going on. So this is like whole new, many generations of how the progression has happened in this whole relationship thing. That I think it's really amazing to reconnect with you and people your age at this point. And we should figure out how this, what's happened in the meantime and how it'll, because I don't know, I don't know a lot about what's currently the thing for young people. So, you know, yeah, we should do some homework, put that thing together.
I'd love to. I mean, not a songwriter, but I could definitely maybe give you some info on what I know anyway about young people, which may not be much. I don't know. I feel like I'm an old soul, but we'll see. All right, bye, Philip. Thank you so much.
Bye bye. Thank you so much.